It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my very special guest is Dr. Raymond Moody. Many of you may know him from his best-selling book, Life After Life, and he has many other intriguing books. I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of his work, and I think I've pretty much consumed nearly every book he's written in audio format. I've watched multiple interviews and videos that he's been a part of. And so it's just been a joy to be on the journey, getting to know his body of work. So I've been super excited to bring him to the show. So all that to say, Dr. Moody, welcome to the broadcast. I've been so looking forward to it.
Me too, Shaun. Thank you a million times for this. And my name is Raymond. I tell you, I just have a constitutional incapacity for formality. And it's great to be with you. I've been looking forward to this show.
Well, and I will refer to you as Raymond throughout the interview. If something's one way on a book cover, I always do it in the opening of the interview and the closing, because I want you to remember that when you head out to buy the person who I'm talking to, whatever book we're talking about. So but I do like to be conversational, so we'll switch over to that. I typically open an interview asking my guests to share a bit of their origin story. Interestingly enough, when I've read somebody's memoir and I'm so familiar with their work, I feel like we're going to tell this massive origin story. So maybe that'll be 3/4 of the interview. We'll see where that takes us. But I guess give us a little bit of context, and then I have some specific places I want to go. But for somebody who watches or listening to this, and this is the first time they've ever encountered you, what are a few things they should know to get us started?
Well, in terms of my educational background, which played into this interest I have, I got a PhD in philosophy from the University of Virginia in 1969, and I was a professor of philosophy for 3 years in North Carolina and loved that. And then had always been interested in the human mind. And so in 1972, went to medical school and graduated in 76 and became a psychiatrist and ultimately a forensic psychiatrist working in maximum security unit for the criminally insane, mostly paranoid schizophrenic people who had committed, these ghastly homicides. And so that's more or less the professional story. In terms of the specific interest I have in near-death experiences, it's really interestingly, that's what people associate me with is near-death experiences, and to me, of course, it's a fascinating subject, and at the same time, to me, that is not the main thread, but it's a corollary of my main interest, which is just so strange. I have to acknowledge that this is very unusual for many people, but what I have been interested in since I was about 7 or 8 years old, and which sort of unifies my whole career, is I got interested in the concept of things that don't make sense. Is what most intrigues me. And I was a fan of Dr. Seuss long before The Cat in the Hat. When that came out, I was horrified. Oh my God, what's this? I was into the, Thidwick, the Big-Hearted Moose, and Horton Hears a Who, and that kinds of things. And so also reading Lewis Carroll. And so I was just very intrigued from the time I was a kid with nonsense. Because, and that's such an unpleasant word for people. And because of that, Shaun, something, there's not many things you think you can prove in some field like this. But one thing I do think I can prove to somebody who would be willing to sit and, go through a process with me is that what keeps us from rational comprehension of the afterlife question and near-death experiences, for one thing, but also many other big questions, is that we hate the word nonsense. Right? People is very, and yet at the same time we love nonsense. doo-wop music, a mixture of nonsense syllables with meaningful parts to create a more powerful overall effect. Or the scat singing of Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong. Or Dr. Seuss's books have sold over 600 million copies. I mean, how many? Alice in Wonderland, who knows? So this is all an indicator that people are deeply attached to nonsense, but the word itself turns people off. And so for that reason, I could show, it would take a while, but I could show you that a whole vast area of human discourse is shut off from us by making that fundamental cognitive error. And so when I was about 12, I realized through reading comic books, actually, Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comic books, a very great artist, Disney artist, Carl Barks was his name, was the author for 20-something years, I guess, of the Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comic books. And he influenced people such as Lucas and Spielberg. Lucas said somewhere in one of his writings, he said, this guy, Carl Barks, is a national treasure. And a lot of his comics had just kind of nonsense in them. So when I was about 12, I had a realization that there's different types of nonsense, right? Which seems self-contradictory. I mean, it seems very bizarre to say that, except listen to this. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toad stood gyre and gimble in the wave. That's nonsense, right? Now listen to this. Holiness breeds the vestigial lipstick of spontaneity. That's nonsense too, but different from the first, right? Or listen to this. That cannibal you men just ate was the last one in this county. That's nonsense too, but a different type. Or hat thoroughly the if zoom how's est, yet a different type. You can go on forever cataloging different types, but my point here is that you have a cognitive capacity that you don't realize you have, which is to distinguish among different types of nonsense, right? But, the common sense view is that nonsense is undifferentiated and unknowable, right? But if I gave you another example, you could fit it into that scheme I just gave you. If I said, for example, when you perform this experiment, if you smell an odorless gas, it is carbon monoxide, you would recognize that, obviously, as an example of the third type I gave you, right? Well, in my university courses I've done on this, I've demonstrated that students learn. They can actually recognize just in, limitless numbers of different types of nonsense. And not only that, use their own creative mind to create examples of that particular type. And when they do, it's like this. I've been doing this course since 69 in various incarnations of it. And so what my students have universally said is that this just absolutely opens their mind. I'm kind of embarrassed to say some of the things that my students have said, because, my strategy is to keep my self-esteem as low as possible, and it's kind of embarrassing. But the reality is these students over the years have said this has really opened up their minds. A number of them have actually attributed their success, in large part to these things that I taught them about. And so that's just something I've been working on. And I didn't come from a religious family. My dad, I gather he was probably traumatized as a surgeon or medic in World War II in the Pacific Theater. But that group didn't talk, that generation, but I gather that's probably what happened. So the way I experienced it, religion was not the thing. And so I grew up with astronomy as my main interest, because that was nonsense incarnate. Because, what size is this thing that we're in? You can't make sense of it. Your mind goes out to the wall, but you say, just a minute, doesn't there have to be something on the other side of the wall? But it doesn't make a bit of sense that it goes on forever either, right? So that's where I just sort of realized when I was about 8 years old, actually, I remember this, that the thought that I had about um, the meaning, the nonsense of this thing we're in, that was okay to me. See, that it didn't disturb me at all because I thought my connection to it was, oh, like Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll. So when I went to medical school, when I went to college at age 18, intending to be an astronomy major, I took a course on philosophy, and just in the first few pages of reading Plato's Republic in September of 1962, I said, I'm going to be a philosophy major. And that's where I woke up to the realization that this question of life after death is a serious question, number one. I knew it only from the cartoons, from a Jack Benny movie I remember seeing with my aunt, Edna. I don't know when it was, late 40s or something. And so I was shocked and horrified. I mean, in a way, I was just like, what? You mean Plato takes this question of an afterlife serious? So the whole Republic ends up at the end in this story of the warrior who is believed dead and gets out of his body and goes through a passageway and sees these things. And so I was really impressed by that story because, number one, it was plain to me that the whole idea of life after death is unintelligible in reality. Now, that's not to say when we hear words like life, there's life after death. Yes, pleasant images flow through our mind, but when we try to nail that down into a statement that is cognitively significant, it's a self-contradiction. Yeah, to say that if you look up the words in the dictionary, to say that there is life after death means there is life after the final irreversible cessation, which is nonsense, right?
Right. It is a contradiction.
It is. And then in order to, when we point it out, we say, well, I don't mean like that. I mean like the life beyond, right? Well, that's just an ungrounded metaphor. Beyond means the spatial relationship. But so all of the terminology really makes no sense. See? So, and where I was really, I guess, reflecting on it, this was the moment when I had that realization that this man, Plato, thinks that this question of the afterlife is the biggest question, and that the closest he has to being able to, being able to articulate it is in a form of language which was plainly to me nonsensical, but not in any bad sense. It just is. When Lincoln was president, there was a formal state ceremony. I forgot what it was about, but everybody was sort of gathered. Okay, and Lincoln's part called for him to mount this horse and to lead a procession away from the scene. But when Lincoln did, the horse picked its own back hoof up and got it caught in the stirrup. So the horse was bouncing around. Everybody was shocked into silence. And, so embarrassed for the president. But Lincoln just looked down to the horse and said, well, if you're getting on, I'm getting off. And everybody just sort of fell apart into laughter. It broke the mood. Now, if you think about that, it's nonsensical to say that a horse could get on its own back by putting a hoof in a stirrup and climbing aboard. But nonetheless, it raises that very one, that undeniable image in your mind of that very movement, right? It creates a mental image. And so that was my association. I had read that in, I think it was Carl Sandburg's biography of Lincoln when I was in junior high. But then that came back to me, that kind of thing, when I was reading this, about Plato, because in the near-death experience, for example, what do people say? Well, number one, there's no words, right? Number two, it is not in space. It's not in space. And there's no time, right? But the only way I have to tell you this is say I got out of my body. I went through a tunnel into a light. I saw my life pass in review. I met my deceased relatives, returned to my body, and came back to life. That's a travel narrative. But a travel narrative is meaningless. if there's no space and time. You see what I'm getting at? And that was what got to me. That was my entree into the, and so 3 years, I'd asked my philosophy professor about that. And he just gave me more information. He talked about how other Greek philosophers had studied these things. But then, and 3 years later, 3 years later, I met Dr. George Ritchie, who was the first person I knew who had had such an experience, a living person. And, that was how all this started. And I still think, one of the big things like that, that's kind of irritating to me, to tell you the truth, is that I want to know what is. I'm just a curious person. And when Life After Life came out, for the first time in my life, really, I was confronted by a raft of people who didn't want to know what is, but who wanted to know that something is. And I guess one of the things about this whole life experience for me, it did not go in the direction I was thinking, is that it meshed in this terrible pseudoscience of parapsychology. It's ridiculous in 2022 to say that the question of life after death is a scientific question. And I could show you over here tonight that anybody who says that seriously there's something wrong with them. It's some kind of delusion. But the delusion is called Scientism. And it's very, broadly spread in our society, where I taught epistemology, for example, which is theory of knowledge. And so the first couple of days in the course, I just asked the students, what do you think knowledge is? And I did that so many times. I guarantee you that anybody who asks that question to a group of kids is going to get this answer: knowledge is science. They state it almost by rote. And so, the first couple of days, I say, well, tell me more about what this is you think. And eventually, what they boil it down to is the following statement. They say that scientific method is the only rational means to secure the truth and establish knowledge. So I would write that statement on the board, and then I would ask the students, is this what you think? And they'd say, yeah. And then I would draw a rectangle around that statement, and I would read it to them and say, so this statement says that scientific method is the only rational means of securing truth and establishing knowledge, right? And then I say, well, how do you know that? Now, anybody who just is above the level of an ignoramus, in my opinion, would say, well, you could say, for example, well, I know that by the scientific method. But that is the fundamental logical flaw we call reasoning in a circle. We say, scientific method is the only rational means of securing truth and establishing knowledge. And I know that by the scientific method is just reasoning in a circle. Okay. Now, the other option seems to be, the statement is, scientific method is the only rational means of securing truth and establishing knowledge. And I know that by some other field. I know that by philosophy or history or the law or literary theory. Right? And that is an outright self-contradiction to say that the scientific method is the only rational means of establishing knowledge. And I know that by philosophy or history, self-contradiction. But it is so ingrained in our society, people just can't get over it. And one of the kind of victims, and now victimizers on this, is the whole pseudoscientific field of parapsychology. It's an insane delusion. And because of it, it prevents the genuine rational study of this most important question of existence. And the reason here I'm on this tear is that I like to teach philosophy and epistemology. It's nothing personal. These parapsychologists are delightful people. It's like, but naivete is the characteristic of them in terms of what they, the way they proceed. And the whole field of parapsychology is based on an incoherent criterion, if you ask me, Shaun, and this is it. Well, how do the parapsychologists, when they study these mediums, what do they think is like, well, what is their criterion? They say that if the medium says something about Uncle Willis that the medium couldn't possibly have known, right? That is their criterion. Now, let's anybody with that sense, I suggest, Shaun is going to be able to think of it this way. Think of that sentence. The medium knew things about Uncle Willis that he couldn't possibly have known. Isn't that a self-contradiction? Any rational person says it is. But if you get enmeshed in that parapsychological thinking, see that all your rational faculties go away. And what that means for people who are genuinely interested in the question of life after death is a rational question. It just looks silly to them because, we can't process. We have no mechanism of processing what people cannot know about us. The reason that dawned on me, I was in 1981, I was on call for Psychiatry department. And I loved emergency psychiatry, and I would sit there for as long as the patient would talk to me to get the whole story, right? Because of virtue or love of I wish so, but no, because it's just so damn fascinating, right? So this one night, I went in, it's 11 o'clock, and I looked in our book, and I had 11 patients. So my normal method of sitting there and hearing the whole story is out the window. So first patient, I go in, and it's a couple in their 50s, and they look worried to death. And they are not the patient. They brought the patient in. What's the problem? Oh, it's our 30-year-old son. He says, like for days, he's been, we're so worried about him. It's like he works all night. Now, normally, see, I would have just, tell me more, which would have helped the patient, the family. But 10 other patients, Dr. Moody. So I said, well, look, has he ever had a psychotic breakdown before? No. This is 30 years old, is late for schizophrenia, which usually comes on early 20s. And except the paranoid type, maybe 35, but and it doesn't sound like a paranoid thing anyway. So I say, well, has he been making lots of long distance phone calls? Yeah. Well, what about spending lots of money? Yeah, he spent $5,000 last month. Well, what about hypersexual? Oh, his poor girlfriend is like, well, what about has he started wearing jewelry? Yes. And then like, well, what about a big house? Yes. Now, I happened to look into the woman's eyes and I saw it. From that woman's point of view, I was saying things about her son that I could not possibly have known. And, but what I was doing from my point of view, I was just listing the symptoms, what we call the soft signs of manic spell. Okay. Now, we are not set up for processing what somebody else could not possibly know about us. That doesn't make any sense. We are set up to try to figure out what somebody can know about us. Okay, so if there's something's wrong with your wrist, you say, oh, I think the orthopedic doctor knows about wrists. Or if it's something with my skin, the dermatologist knows about skin. The only people we go to because of things they couldn't possibly have known are mediums and psychics. Does that strike anybody else as bizarre as it does to me? But anyway, this whole pseudoscientific field of psychology, of parapsychology, not only is a pseudoscience which deludes people, but it's also a blockade to the genuine rational investigation of this most important question of existence. And so, what I am getting at here is that the question of life after death, the inertia in investigating this question, is not caused by any genuine rational limitation. It's caused by a folly called scientism, which, these people just love that word science, and they want to hear that, this question of life after death is scientific. For some reason, that makes them feel better. And so these parapsychologists go right along with that. And I just think the older you get, the more you see people shouldn't delude people and inflict on them their own delusions. To me, I always say, look, I may be wrong. This is just the way I figured it. But and I think that being raised in a it's being educated in a philosophical context, I guess, seems sort of bizarre to other people, because when I write a book and I put out a book, I want people to refute it. To try to refute it, because number one, if I do a piece of work and somebody with a good mind really puts his mind to it and analyzes it very carefully and can find a flaw in it, then I am benefited, because that brings me closer to the truth, doesn't it? On the other hand, if my colleagues vigorously, look at my work and they say I can't find any flaw, that's a plus too, because it gives me an indicator if maybe I'm on the right track here. And so I am, with all that as context, I am willing to say to you here, Shaun, that I, Raymond Moody, do hereby declare that I have worked out a new system of thinking that solves the real problems related to the big question of life after death, which were brilliantly stated by Plato. By the way, in terms of the Christian thing, Plato, this may sound extraordinary, but you look it up and you see for yourself. The Christian theology of the afterlife was derived from Plato's Phaedo. This is historical fact. You can look it up. It's where I found out about it was in 1964, reading Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. That's where I learned about it. But he's not an expert on religious studies. So over the years, I've asked religious studies people all over the world, "Is this true?" And they say, "Yeah, that's the historical fact." And so he pointed out the difficulties. What happened is, in the late 19th century, with the spiritualism and the mediumship and so on, some eminent scientists were convinced by all this rigmarole and formed what's called the Society for Psychical Research, which is a kind of parapsychological organization. And their thought was, oh boy, now we got this. Let's apply the scientific method to this. And that was the beginning of parapsychology. And that was where any insight on the part of a rational person was lost. See, because what those Crooks was the guy who's just totally, befuddled by this fake medium, as many of them were, and so wrote this, and it creates sensation. Oh, this parapsychology is going to prove the afterlife. Well, I say that is a false historical beginning. The rational study of the afterlife did not begin with Crooks and these people studying mediums in the late 19th century. It began with Plato. And because they didn't know a thing about Plato is how they got into this delusion that they are circulating. And one of Plato's points about the difficulty of rational enlightenment on the afterlife was that he said, there's got to be a story, because the notion itself is so obscure and even self-contradictory that you've got to have a narrative component or a storyline just to get thought about it started. And they had the same kind of stories we do. They knew about cases of people who almost died and returned. But what Plato pointed out was, we all love these stories. Personally, I've heard thousands. I can't wait to hear the next one, right? But I also realize that even if we had a bazillion stories, that wouldn't add up to rational proof of an afterlife. And so what you need in addition is some set of concepts that can lead you from the experiential narratives to the statement of life after death. And that's the real problem, which parapsychologists don't want to face. They look at these stories as like narrative reports of facts. And then you have to check them out. Right? Like, well, did he really, did he see the object we put up on the shelf above? And that's just so ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just like that. Grown men who don't have any philosophical background at all perpetuate these delusions and follies on the public is, to me, it's obnoxious, to tell you the truth. And so what we now have, I claim, and I want to be severely judged on this. I'm not asking for endorsement, people. I'm asking to read this really thoroughly and critically and as hard as you can, try to find a flaw. Because if there is no flaw, then there is a genuine breakthrough in the rational investigation of life after death. I'm claiming that now because I want to be refuted. Okay. And what specific set of concepts do we use? Well, here we are we're in a situation immediately which afflicts not just the parapsychologists, but everybody who is interested in this field in a way, is that the narratives are so riveting that's what draws and keeps most people in connection with this, is hearing the wonderful stories. And I understand that. And as I can tell you from 40, 50 years of experience lecturing on this to people, as soon as in the United States of America, you start talking to these same people about concepts, their eyes go up. And that is why, see, this is an inherently unsatisfiable feeling these people get into. They go to hear the charismatic speaker about the near-death experience. It makes them feel really wonderful. They get that California look in their eyes. And then they go back to work on Monday and gradually it goes back down. So by Friday, they got to have another dose of the charismatic speaker to lift it up again, because there's no concepts in their mind to nail it down. And the fact that the narratives draw off is what holds people to it. So they're just not going to listen to concepts.
Yeah, I'm going to give you just a break, Dr. Moody, if you don't mind. I have found, just in helping other people share these stories and these encounters that they have, is that people get very fixated on the beats and the rhythms of the story, and they don't often process what does this mean? Why is this significant? I'd actually like to back up a little bit, kind of into your origin story. Clearly, you have had a passion throughout your life and your career of, pursuing the, as you said, nonsense, things that might be very difficult to measure. Kind of playing in the gray areas, if you will. I'm curious for you, when you first encountered Dr. George Ritchie's story. You've shared in many of your books about how you had a student who was in an accident who approached you, who was part of a philosophy class, and sharing that story. Like, what was it for you in terms of your bent towards pursuing the nonsense, the hard to measure, the hard to know? Like, what was that trigger point after those two incidents that made you keep going? Because this is at that time a very unique direction to go in terms of study and research and pursuit. Because a lot of people would say you're kind of the father of this space. So you coined new terms, new phrases. You were like the first guy. So why? What made you keep going?
That is, I guess, the way I look at it is that, to me, this is something that was the foundation of Western thought. Their thoughts about these near-death experiences was one of the things these early Greek philosophers were fascinated with. So, to me, I've never thought of me as being the origin. To me, it's what happened, I gather, is that the 60s, the 70s saw the advent of these techniques of cardiopulmonary resuscitation that enabled us to bring many people back from a state that, before that, the average, almost all of them who were dead. But then, now we have a technology to bring people back from that state. So that's what I surmised happened, that it was just by the time I came out with this, that there were so many of them that anybody who really was curious and wanted to know, rather than to responding in some ideological context, that anybody who really wanted to look into it would be able to find cases. I knew that. And so, it was nothing. It's nothing to do with courage. I've heard, oh, you were so brave. No, it's just like, because I knew full well that anybody who looked into it was going to find the same thing. Yeah. And similarly, I say now that where is the problem? What is holding us back from, in the real world, not in the parapsychological world, that they don't even understand the problem they're working on, but in the real world, where is the problem? Well, David Hume said it well. David Hume, 1711 to 1776, had a lot to do with the formulation of the modern notion of causation, for example, and found difficulties in the fabric of inductive reasoning and so on. He's just a very brilliant man, and was asked to talk about the afterlife question, and said, and anybody who follows this words in your head, as I say, and we'll see he's right, he said, by the mere light of reason, it seems difficult to prove the immortality of the soul. Some new species of logic is requisite for that purpose, and some new faculties of the mind that they may enable us to comprehend that logic. And that is the reality. Now, why that is was articulated a little while later by philosophers like A.J. Ayer and the logical empiricism philosophy of the early 20th century. And what they just pointed out very plainly to anybody who will think it through is that the notion of an afterlife is unintelligible, right? So A.J. Ayer said, for example, he said, it's permissible in our language to say that a man survived a total change of personality or total loss of memory. But he said, but it's a self-contradiction to say that a man would survive the annihilation of his body. And in the real world of logic and facts rather than fantasies, that's the case. But you see, where our mistake has been You combine that with the Hume problem, see, and what you got is that what we need, what kind of logic is it that we need, right? Some new species of logic and some new faculties of the mind that they may enable us to comprehend that logic. What we need, paradoxically, is a logic of the unintelligible or logic of nonsense, which seems totally impossible. Okay, but I, Raymond Moody, hereby declare that I have solved Hume's problem to the point where we can now equip people with a new logic, not to supplant or replace the one we have, but to supplement it. And when the language is no longer literal, Aristotelian logic is predicated on literal meaning. When you try to put the question of life after death into a logic that means, it's literal meaning, I mean, that's ridiculous. And it's so stupid that only an ideologue, I think, could come up with something so stupid as that. So, I, Raymond Moody, hereby declare that this book, Making Sense of Nonsense, what it does is that it takes your mind through a process during which you will see that far from being a blur or a void, that nonsense is actually a highly structured dimension of expression, to where the common sense view is that if this is the level of ordinary meaningful language, then nonsense is somewhere down here, right? It's sublinguistic. But what I can plainly show, and I beg anybody who can refute me, please do, because I want to know what is. So what I claim is that you can go through a process that equips your mind with a set of principles for thinking about something that doesn't make sense. Then and while you're still here, this will improve your professional skills if you are a medical doctor or a person who is in the field of advertising or even an attorney. That's the main reason for improving your mind. And one of the things that will happen is that when you happen to have subsequently a near-death experience, you will be able to formulate it in an entirely new way, which is outside of the framework of the travel narrative form, right? It has already happened, at least once to my knowledge. A wonderful, kind-hearted elderly man who is an eminent sculptor and scientist who actually worked with Bell of the Bell theorem, and it was just a lovely man. He took my course on nonsense some years ago, subsequently developed H1N1, was in the hospital for 60 days, lost his leg to gangrene, had 3 cardiac arrests. During this, had these near-death experiences, which was the main reason he was calling me. But in the minute, his voice suddenly changed tones, very energetic, and he said, "And Raymond, when I was over there on the other side," he said, "my mind went back to the course and nonsense." And he said, "And I saw that what you're saying is true, that you can't comprehend how that world is connected to this world unless you take the unintelligibility axis into account." And so what I say is, I, Raymond Moody, hereby state and claim that this is a genuine breakthrough in the genuine, rigorous, rational investigation of life after death. And if that is not true, then retrospectively, the whole work of life after life is ridiculous. And I mean, it's unintelligible. And therefore, I hereby abrogate life after life, except in the situations of people who have worked through this enough to see what it really means. So, and I'm doing this not because, I'm finished with self-esteem. I just think that pop psychology thing is the importance of self-esteem. That's ridiculous. it's like my philosophy, and like the way I try to do it is I try to keep my self-esteem as low as possible. Right? So I'm not looking for a ego charge out of this. I'm looking for, am I right or not?
Right. I mean, I feel like you're looking for others to, like you, go after the pursuit of what is, and if they go further than you to challenge you, I love what you've been sharing in the sense of one of the things that's amazed me through the years, especially the last few years, is how much people they fail to realize they have a lens, they have a worldview, they have some kind of a bent, process, a system in their mind for how they process whatever they encounter. Now, if it's an afterlife experience, it can be difficult because you don't have often a grid for that. But I've just been amazed at how often people, like, they don't even have a concept that they're processing through a system or a framework or a grid, and that just continues to amaze me. So I like that you're forcing us to try to think through that. We actually have a lens that either clouds or informs how we respond, how we understand everything. I feel like a lot of people throughout culture don't even realize that that's at work when they're processing the world around them.
Yes, very wise, Shaun. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's just like that. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. I remember reading that as a kid and just saying, that wasn't one that particularly struck me. I was struck by a lot of other things in Plato, but the unexamined life, maybe I'd always been doing that anyway.
Well, and I'd love to hear.
The more you see, it's true.
that is for sure. I'm going to save that question. I just want to backtrack for a minute. So in terms of life after life, I mean, that's, I think, the book a lot of us know you for. Clearly, you've had a pursuit of knowledge and understanding that you've been going after for many decades. But as the book became popular, what were some of the different, and I'll use the word camps, I think Christians and pastors were coming at you from one direction, doctors were coming at you from another direction, people kind of in the parapsychology space were coming at you from one direction. So they're coming through their lens, hoping they can bring some kind of answer to what they're pursuing. And I feel like you kind of were coming at it from your unique direction. So when that book picked up steam and got popular, what were some of the different things people were maybe trying to pull from you that wasn't even in what you were trying to do? I feel like people, they wrote themselves into your story, but there wasn't necessarily an answer for them there.
Yeah, exactly. And I got to say this too. It's like maybe from what I said about parapsychology, some of the people listening in are saying, well, I didn't know that Raymond Moody was one of those skeptics. Well, I am and I ain't, because let me say this. That whole organization of the skeptics, so-called, is just a branch of parapsychology. It's all the same people, and it's the same mindset. It's like when you go to the conferences, there's people both, and also it's like the ideology is basically the same. But the basic flaw that upsets me about the so-called skeptics is that these ignoramuses have no knowledge at all about what the word skeptic means. Now, how can you create a whole society and solicit donations from people because you're a skeptic when you don't know what the word means? Well, let me say, we all hear them say, oh, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. Hold on to that sentence for me. Now, what is a skeptic? Aristotle codified the logic that you and I are using right now, okay, predicated on literal meaning. Okay, and so and if you think of the logic, you could think of logic, let's say it's a device for generating conclusions, okay, from premises. And so Pyrrho, Pyrrho, about 30 years after the death of Aristotle, was an excellent logician and had studied that. And by then it was a standard thing. And so he said, well, just a minute here. Let's suppose that we do it this way. Let's say that we apply logic very rigorously and, with extreme rigor, and that we ask every question and we bear down on our inquiry. But in the end, and this is the essence of skepticism, which any fool can look at by looking, for example, in the outlines of the Pyrrhonist philosophy, that in this context, see, there is no distinction between the intellectual quest and the spiritual quest. So this is a mind-altering thing as well. So Pyrrho says, let's suppose that we go through this process, we really bear down, we ask every question to you, but in the end, we refrain from drawing a conclusion. That is what it means. Now, is this just to be obnoxious? Well, no. What it is they found that if they did it rigorously and you practice this like a spiritual modality, it really does open up parts of your mind you had no idea existed. That's one reason. But also because if you think of it geometrically and everybody else is rushing in this direction to get to the conclusion, but your technique is to refrain from a conclusion, then you see things along the side pathways that they had missed, right? And that is exactly why now, when you listen to these caustic ideologues who incorrectly refer themselves as skeptics, you will hear them say things like, well, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain, which translates to, I'm a person who doesn't draw conclusions, and my conclusion is such and such. That is being an ignoramus, folks. This whole skeptical movement is just, it's crazy. It's composed of entertainers who think, very not well educated, but they look at this, we know the answers, or sort of second level scientists, who, but it's and the whole, if you think of it as a literary style, that's satire, isn't it? It's making fun of the people who are believers in the paranormal, and that whole group too. It's like so interesting. None of them know their whole. I've been to their groups over the years. The degree of ignorance in that group is so palpable. I mean, it's just the most common things you think they should know. I was talking to them one time, and I was just because they're the whole king and commander of the whole group is Lucian of Samosata. So one day they asked me to go to their group, and I started talking about Lucian. Well, what about Carl Sagan? It's like they're fools and ignoramuses. And what they do is that they prevent genuine rational inquiry into this most important question of existence. By the way, Paul Kurtz, who founded that skeptical group, was a dear man. And I love Paul, and he and I would have these things. And I think I finally did sort of make inroads to Paul in this, because at the time I first got to know him, they called themselves the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, which they abbreviated to PsyCops. Right. And they go, we're the psychops. They have a law enforcement model, and they're going to go out and arrest these offending parapsychologists and so on. And so I said to Paul one time, I said, Paul, it seems to me that when you put science and cops together, is that, I thought cops had to do with authoritarian things and isn't scientists. And, I remember, well, a year or so later, I noticed they changed their name. and some of the old guard got really furious. We want to be a psychops. They're imagining themselves as law enforcement officers. And I tell you, a lot of my childhood was spent, with my Uncle Fairley driving around in a cop car, and my brother was a cop. And I tell you, these folks are not like law enforcement mentality. This is a different thing. But they enjoyed playing the cop role. But then I think what happened was Paul, I saw him that had the impact. And then about a year later, they changed their name. I don't know if there was a causal connection or not.
I wouldn't be surprised if you at least had some level of influence. I think we can get into a place where we like to give ourselves cool sounding names and interesting acronyms that we go by to give ourselves a feeling of importance or power, or again, maybe we're writing a story that we want to be a part of. And so that's part of how we're doing it. I really liked what you said earlier about kind of connecting with some of those side pathways that you missed. So like for me, I've read and interviewed people who, are coming at the near death and afterlife space from a Christian experience, from a psychic medium experience, and kind of everything in between. I've been really broad in just trying to understand the space and really, and again, I tend to process everything through a Christian worldview personally, but what's been helpful to talk to so many different people who approach it from so many different angles as they're explaining how they understand it or how they approach something. I just see, as I get to look through their lens partially, I just see different things I would miss because I'm processing everything through my own worldview. And so I've just loved that. It's been so helpful. They pushed me into ditches that I would have never spent any time investigating. The thing I want to go back to now is just you had talked about kind of the sadness when we live this unexamined life. That's just kind of it's pathetic, really. But in terms of people who have these encounters, again, I was just with some of my good friends taping for my TV show last weekend, and both of the guys one guy had a hell encounter and a heaven encounter in his story. The other guy has a heaven encounter. They both talked about feeling just depressed after their experience for a time. But there is this phenomenon that after people have these encounters, they suddenly have an intensely examined life, or people come back so changed that they can't even keep the same career they had. It's not uncommon for people to have divorces happen because their personality shifts. I'd love to hear just from your perspective, after all these decades of playing in this space, why does this push us into this place where personality shift, we really examine life, like people dramatically change after these sorts of experiences?
Well, the way I've always looked, as far as I can tell, what it is when you have this experience where you see every single thing you've ever done in your life, and you re-witness it, not from just your point of view, but from the point of view with whom you interacted. That must be pretty life-changing as well. I just think, and everything is there at once. They say there's no time, you see everything. It's like I think that this one of the things that we can draw as a sound inference, I claim, Shaun, and again, I would like to be contradicted if I've made a mistake on this, but I've thought about it for a long time, and it looks to me like there is one thing that we can draw as an absolutely, unquestionably sound conclusion from the specific aspect of the near-death experience, which is the life review. And I don't see any way around this inference. But if somebody can find a flaw in this, please tell me about it. But this is the way I look at it. What people tell us is that they, when they have this experience, time stands still, and they are surrounded by a holographic panorama, sort of, consisting of every single thing they've ever done. And they re-witness each event from the point of view, not just of themselves, but of all the people with whom they interacted, which is why you would see, they say, well, obviously then the love is the most important thing, right? In that context. Now, what I claim, and this is the inference I've made, and again, I ask to be contradicted, but this is the inference. I think that we need to, afterlife aside, let's not think of the afterlife for a moment. I think we can infer soundly from what we know about these near-death experiences is that at least for some of us, life is a two-phase process. Think back. You go through it from the point of view of the protagonist or the actor. Then time stands still, and you re-witness the whole thing from the point of view of the other characters. Now, doesn't that mean that life is a two-phase process? And I think, that's a pretty startling inference, at least for some of us. But, as far as I can tell, it's not. And one more thing here is this whole thing about proof of life after death, Shaun, is bandied around in the most irresponsible thing because it's like people, the tabloids, the proof, but not only that, parapsychologists are like proof, that is so absurd. Now let me please, just because this is a very important point, if I can't make any other point, I'd like to make this. number one, what is proof? That's a very complex concept. I could give you, I was professor of logic. I could talk to you a long time about the concept of proof. Okay, but I want to look at it a different aspect, and that is the effect that the word proof has on people, all right, which it gives them a certain confidence. Now, I know from the fact that I do grief counseling, that there's a lot of people out there just going through the most horrible things. Like I was just crying last night about this poor woman, oh my God, that I was talking about and the grief she's going through. I mean, it's just so horrible. And I mean, I lost a child myself, my first child in 1970 at the age of 36 hours, which is still, you never get over it. And I know I just talk to people all the time who have these, horrible things that they're going through in terms of grief. Now, that's a reality. Now, the second thing is, in this society, and I don't approve of this myself, but it's a reality, when you have a doctoral degree behind your name, people take what you say seriously, right? And so this whole notion of proof of an afterlife makes it a passive thing. See, the provee has to be the passive receptor to the superior person with the degree who tells you how it is, and that gives you the proof, right? That's the model. All right, now, let's say that somebody confidently says, well, I've proved this is a proof of life after death. To see that from the point of view of the people who are grieving, this doctor, I was the one who lost my son. I felt so bad, but I heard this doctor on TV say the other day that they've proved that there's life after death. Flash forward, let's say that a flaw is shown in that proof. Where does that leave the grieving people? And that is the why that this kind of parapsychological, nonsensical, meaningless, crazy approach to these important questions is it's a matter of, I think it is. In 2022, I claim that it is professional malpractice on the part of anybody with a doctoral degree to claim that there is proof of life after death, unless it will stand up. And the only way it's going to stand up, it can't be as a passive receptor. You've got to take people through a process where they see it for themselves. They can't just listen to the profound doctor part, pontificate there. They got to put some mental effort into it. And you can do it. But it's like, what I'm hereby claiming is that there is an inherent element of professional malpractice in claiming proof of life after death, unless you can absolutely rigorously prove it to any possible objections because of the harm that it inflicts on people who are grieving.
Well, and I would say in terms of how we've set up society, we look to people with PhDs and doctorates as our experts, and so that's definitely why we lean in that direction. I think
I had 2 doctoral degrees. I had 2 doctoral degrees plus 3 years of teaching philosophy before I was 31 years old. And you're old enough, Shaun, you're not quite as long as I am, but you're old enough to see, like I do, that there had to be something terribly wrong with somebody who would have 2 doctoral degrees.
By that age, yeah.
And they're wrong. I spent my whole life with my nose in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, once you get into your probably mid-40s, you have something to say because you have a good mix of experience and knowledge. And man, when we're in our 20s and 30s, we really, really don't know what we don't know. I think that thing, though, in terms of looking to people to give us help, I mean, that is, I would describe that as a faith element. We're taking a leap between what we can prove and what we know, and we're putting our hope in something. And so that I would describe it as a faith leap to follow in a direction or believe what somebody says. But at the same time, if the rug is pulled out from under somebody and what they said is proven to be false, or their character gets questioned, if your faith was relying on that person to give you hope, I can definitely see where if you're a grieving person, it would just dash you back on the rocks of despair, and you'd be right back where you started.
That's right. However, I mean, there's a way out of this. I mean, I hereby claim you can go through a mental process that's not very hard. where you can then look at this question of life after death in a whole new, genuinely rational way. The only thing holding it back is ideologies. It's like, this has got to be scientific, which is, as we showed in that argument about scientism, is meaningless. And well, what I'm saying is, I claim, and I'm very confident in this, that we are on the point of a genuine breakthrough in the rational investigation of life after death. It will not come from science. It is a pre-scientific study in the sense that it articulates principles that are testable and, collective, and that when we put these into operation, I claim we will actually be able to step across the line that divides this world from the next together. And I don't mean in a physical way, but rather in a sense that we can get together and hone our minds together through a collective process where it will open up whole new ways of looking into the question of life after death. But the only thing that holding it back is ideologues, in essence.
And I'm curious, and you share about this in a number of your books. Did your view of afterlife encounters or these sorts of experiences, did it change, or did you feel like you gained a new level of understanding through your own near-death experience, or did that shift anything for you, or did it really just reinforce what you already thought?
No, I am a skeptic. I mean, it's and please don't hear that as these ideologues who don't even know what the word skeptic means. I'm talking about Pyrrho, the founder of the skeptical movement. And so I do have a constitutional antipathy to drawing conclusions. I mean, what's the hurry to draw a conclusion? Sometimes the judges would force me to draw some sort of conclusion in my forensic cases, but they understood, that they were just as confused. I mean, I enjoyed being with judges because they were mostly philosophically trained or humanities, and they liked it that I could talk about the conceptual issues in these insanity cases. But and I lost track there, Shaun, but. I guess, I'm just getting to is that these things are amenable to rational solution, but it requires a change of framework and a little bit of patience. It's like when people join up with this paranormal thing, mostly what they want is stories. It's even the people who claim to be professional investigators. It's all about stories, and I love stories too, but the stories leave you unsatisfied and leave you yearning to nail it down rationally. You're not going to do it with science. You can do it by thinking a new way about things that don't make sense.
You're gonna burst all my bubbles, man. No, I mean, I think you point out something important though, is that in terms of people who are sharing stories, regardless of what space, most of the people we tend to follow, they're phenomenal narrators, and so they're gifted at drawing you into a story. But just like any story, and you alluded to this earlier. Kind of the impact of it fades, and we come back for that next story because we do want that emotional high or that connection that we felt to whatever that person happened to share. If you're willing to take a few more minutes, I have two more places I want to go yet before we land the conversation.
Not just you're not just at your service, but where both of us are is that we are at the service of the folks listening in. So I am just happy to sit here as long as you want.
Well, we'll keep going for a bit yet then. What's been interesting again, maybe not unlike you when you started in this space. I entered into this space starry-eyed and kind of naive and not knowing what I was going to encounter. Because again, I work in the Christian publishing space. I started out talking to people who had heaven encounters and that sort of a thing. And then you start to get into the weeds, and your people are talk about remembering past lives, and you talk at length in some of your material about past life regressions and even a therapy related to that. I just love to get your take on what do we do with that? Because it is a part of this sort of NDE afterlife space that, there's a lot of things I can process through my worldview grid and try to understand. But that was one where I'm like, I'm not really sure what to even do with that. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, the way I look at it is, David Hume said, he thought that the reincarnation was the only view of an afterlife that a rational philosophical person could entertain. And I suspect that's because Hume was a historian. This is just speculation, but I'm assuming that, as a historian, he understood the profound role of narrative and story in human life, and that of the different kinds of views of the afterlife, I guess reincarnation is the one that is most story-based, right? It's like because personal identity, it's like the process was, it went from Hermotimus, 600 BC, who could get out of his body at will. So these philosophers began to think, just a minute, that means we're two things, the body and the mind, which is primary. Plato says, or Pythagoras, Pherecydes and Pythagoras say, well, there's the immortal, immaterial soul. Plato takes that up and makes it, official. And then in the Middle Ages, you could go be burned at the stake for denying that. But then 1500s, Thomas Hobbes used, what are we talking about in the first place? Isn't it the notion of an immaterial object, or substance, nonsensical? So then John Locke, who was, influential in the foundation of our Constitution, said, well, it's consciousness. Well, your essence is your consciousness and specifically your memories. But David Hume says, well, I look inside myself, I don't see anything solid or is constant. I just see the impression of the moment. And that's where psychology is now, sort of, is the self is an illusion. Where I am on it is that your life is your story. What is your personal identity except your life story? And so what the reincarnation, and by the way, there's so many myths about this too. I mean, just like these New Agers are into this idea that the sacred Madame Blavatsky, fluttered in from Hungary or wherever it was in the 19th century and brought the notion of reincarnation into the West. Well, maybe I'm wrong then, because I understood that, the Western thought came from the Greek philosophers, and didn't Pherecydes and Pythagoras and Plato talk about the immortal soul? You get so confused, and about reincarnation as they did. So it was in Western society from the very beginning. With Plato and Pythagoras was the notion of reincarnation. And then it was taken up into Christianity for a while, but then, the ones who went along with it apparently disappeared somehow. So, like Origen, I guess. I mean, I've read Origen, and it seems like he's talking about something like reincarnation there. And so, this is just forever. And some people get shocked and horrified because it's something about demons or whatever. Well, I say, I just don't know. But it looks to me like it's I've seen puzzling things with my own kids. I just don't know what to say, except that I think that the main work we have to do on reincarnation is not accumulation of more cases and stories, but rather some, rational elucidation of what we're talking about. It's like, well, what is the person that is the alleged subject of all these different lies? What is that entity? It's, I think of it in terms of literary theory. I'm very interested in literary theory, not so much literature. I'm sorry, folks. Reading novels is such a damn waste of time. I read Don Quixote in 1964. This is it. Nothing top this. So I haven't read a novel since 1964, because to me, what is interesting to me is facts and all. But in terms of the literary theory behind this, see, I remember in high school reading about the framing device, which is a narrative that holds a bunch of other narratives together, like the Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, right? The story is that the pilgrims are going along to Canterbury, and that's the frame narrative. But the frame narrative is a device for telling all these individual stories, like the Wife of Bath story and the Miller's Tale and so on. And so what I want to know is, let's assume for a moment that I'm thinking about reincarnation. Let's say there is. Well, then what would be the framework holding all the individual stories that you are together? See, is that a story, and a super story, or is it some other kind of non-narrative? And my answer is I have no idea. But I think that's where you have to put the thought process, because otherwise, it's a shame and a sin, I think, to see the afterlife establishment, as I call it, wedded to these nonsensical things, and to trying to fool people who are not very cognizant of what science is, and to fooling them into thinking that this is something scientific, and therefore distorting the view of the public about what science is, in my opinion.
Well, and I like what you just described in terms of, trying to fit it into some kind of a grid or a framework, a way that we can actually make sense of it and connect dots. Because if they're just individual things and they're not connected, then you just have a lot of individual things. So trying to figure out the rhythm or the pattern, and also, not unlike when your book Life After Life came out, people came at you with their own kind of stuff and their own bent and what they wanted. And so in terms of trying to get a language to kind of bring the different disparate groups together who have an interest in this area, we're all going at this from different ways. We're all using different language. So, it lacks even a little bit of common ground often for people to, bring their research, their stuff together and kind of have a conversation. I mean, honestly, in terms of people who are approaching this from a Christian perspective, people who are secular, people who are coming from a psychic medium perspective, all these groups don't tend to play well together. So it's kind of a weird sandbox that we're all kind of in right now.
It is. But, it's like human beings, right? I just, yeah, that's right.
Well, I think the place I'd want to land, and I don't want to miss this because it's just such a fascinating part of your journey. You just accidentally, literally get hit by this book on crystal gazing, which connects kind of back to where things started for you in terms of Greek philosophy, and you just go in this direction that I wasn't expecting to encounter as I started checking out all of your different books. I just love to hear about that kind of season of your work, because it's fascinating.
Everybody who knows me as a friend knows I'm so damn boring. Because all these things that I'm interested in, they all go back to me to Greek philosophy. And the way I found is that I had a wonderful course my first semester at UVA on the Greek classics, and which changed my life. And one of the books we read was Herodotus, and in there, and I was a great respecter of Herodotus, and I was reading through this, and suddenly I hear about this place called the Oracle of the Dead, where some king sends this delegation there to call up his wife from the dead. And so I thought I was disappointed in Herodotus. I was 18 years old at the time, because I knew from my 18-year-old all-knowingness that there couldn't be a place where you could go to call up the dead. But the reason I got more interested in this was that this institution, the Oracle of the Dead, was an essential entity in the development of Western thought. And because if you went back to the time of the founders of Western thought, like the early Greek philosophers, and you'd ask somebody in Athens, what's a philosopher? They'd say is a person who probes into things up in the air, which meant out of body flight or travel, out of your body or flying, or things down under the earth, which was a code word for calling up the spirits of the dead. And that's what their contemporaries, one of the ways they identified the founders of Western thought. And there is some reality to it. And Aristophanes played the verbs. There's a scene, and for some reason, I remember, I just was riveted by this passage, but it's like in the better translation, it's far away in Webfoot land and the swamp of dismal dread. There we saw foul Socrates come calling up the dead. And so what this means is that's what philosophers were supposed to do. And it actually, there was a lot of historical basis of it too. Now, in 1985, I guess I was reading a classical journal, and I discovered that I read that Soterios Baccharis, who was a well-known classical archaeologist, I knew his work from other contexts, had actually located and excavated the Oracle of the Dead. And based on what they found there, I figured out what they were doing. It was basically to create an optical depth in which you gaze into the optical depth. And many people under those circumstances will see very vivid imagery. It's not like you're making it up like a mental image. It's projected into your visual space, so it appears to you three-dimensionally. Okay, and so I had known about this process from my interest in altered states of consciousness. So I figured out that's what they were doing. And my whole take on it, was, I see what you were thinking, but the way I was thinking about this is, oh my God, this is how I can see how the Western philosophy stemmed from this. See that? So it's the same to me as with the near-death experiences. So I set it up and tried it, and it works. And by the way, in terms of the Christian thing, I am not a theologian, but I just am amazed by how many people think that they're experts on these theological things. That's astonishing to me. But, there are plenty of people with their very definite opinion, which they claim got from the same source that the person with the opposite opinion also say. So, it's crazy to me. But, my thought was that if I could set this up and show that it works, that it would teach me something about the origin of Western philosophy. And so that's why I did it. And it works. And it's been incorporated now. I think it's used some now as a therapy for grief. And it was used in the Middle Ages by physicians as therapy for grief too. It's like there are not such a thing as medical textbooks in that period. So doctors made their own medical books. And one of those I've seen, or actually two of those I know, the physicians would set up a mirror situation to help their patients through a grieving process. And it does seem to work for that, or it actually helps. But I know that just sounds boring, but that's where I am with it. To me, it's fascinating.
Oh, I don't think it sounds boring at all. What I love just with all kind of the milestones and the beats of your story that we've hit on today is there's just been this almost this insatiable pursuit of just to understand and what is and to unpack. And I love that you've chased things that to the average person is just obscure or they're not going to go there. And so you were willing to spend time in the nonsensical places. And it's just been fascinating to hear you unpack parts of your journey for us today.
Well, thank you so much. My heart goes out to everybody listening to this. It's just, I know it's pretty wild stuff, but
well, and I have one more question before we wrap up. And I think I got this quote from your memoir, The Paranormal book, or somewhere. I had it written down. But I think the place that I'd love to land, I have a quote of that religion and afterlife are two entirely different concepts. From in my world, I'm gonna probably always through my worldview try to conflate the two. But in terms of I'd love to just hear your take on that concept, because it's provocative. It's going to challenge people to try to think through that.
Yeah, well, what I say is this: is I am not religious, never have been, and I talk to God every day, and I've had a personal encounter with God, and I talk to Him all the time, and God has never said a word to me about religion. I mean, it's just like I'm sorry. It's like when people, I know so many people whose main activity in relation to God is arguing about and thinking about and debating about whether God exists, right? And people are always asking me, Raymond, do you believe that God exists? And I always say, absolutely not. And let me explain why. Because I, Raymond Moody, am a limited human being. Any belief about God that I could have would be off base. Number two, if you think about that sentence, do you believe that God exists? The emphasis of the sentence is on the word exist. Now, I was a professor of logic. I could take about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour. I could take you through the process. I could show you what the concept of existence means and even how to symbolize it and to use it in meaningful sentences. But when it comes to God, I give up. What I'm getting at is people try to draw the existence as a human concept. Think of the weirdness of this. People try to draw a concept called existence around God. I say God breaks out of the concept of existence. What I say is I have a relationship with God. The believing part, I just got to say, anybody, to me, this whole idea that there's an ideological or a theological test to get into the afterlife. What? You got to be up on your Bible beliefs to get to. No way. No way. I just say that's ridiculous. It doesn't enter into my mind. And I think that God is, all these things. It's like, oh, God, it's like the creation that's gone to this thing about God created the world in 6 days and breathed on it. And I say, what are you talking about? God is creating everything all the time. There's ideologues out there who are trying to get the government to teach your kids and my kids some Bible belief rather than what seems to be the case from science. And I say, your creationism doesn't go far enough. You should be thinking about why God is creating everything I'm seeing right now. This is what I think.
Well, and in terms of your body of work, books, I've enjoyed to steal kind of from Alice in Wonderland, kind of going down the rabbit hole, if you will, all of your works that I've been working for you the last couple of months. If people haven't read any of your works, what would be the one you'd love to have us start with?
God is bigger than the Bible. It just came out. It's by Amazon. But also, I just had an idea, Shaun. And, this is rough here, but let's work it out together. I ask you to read this book, to work the exercises. There are exercises in there to reformat your mind, how to think. Read that book as a favor to me. Take notes. Try to find a hole in it. See what I'm saying? Like, don't go through it just like saying, oh, Raymond Moody is right, but just like, well, is this a valid case? Try in every way you can to find a hole in it. Is how I like for people to do with me. And so we could then have I don't want to interfere with your program, but we could have a conversation whether you want it on your show or not. See, but what I mean is, and I'm asking you as a favor because it's like I gave this manuscript to 14 of the most brilliant people I've ever known, none of whom had any interest in the afterlife. It's a professor of business, professor of psychology, a nuclear physicist. And I asked them to find a hole in it for me. All of them said they found typos. No, I can't find any flaw in this. So you see, where I am with this, I'm looking for people paradoxically to refute me. See, because I don't want to be deluded. And unless I'm deluded, you see, this is a breakthrough into how to think about the afterlife, but it's not going to appeal to the people who are already got their minds made up or their way of looking at it. See, like the parapsychological community, this will go nowhere then. They'll think this is silly or stupid. But what I say is they are silly or stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. And so let's, if you would do that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'll say, I don't even feel like it's a challenge. I'll say invitation accepted. I think it'd be fun. I've listened to the audiobook, but I always process things better when I actually read the physical book. I'm a physical book kind of guy. But I think it'd be fun to do a follow-up conversation where I'll read through it, and I'd love to just talk through how it's challenged me, how it's informed me, and maybe I come at things from just a different angle than other people who you've been able to talk with about the book. I think that'd be a fun exercise. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I want to see all kinds of people, because it's like what this means is that, see, our logic is incomplete. And we have a way now of breaking through that so we can have a much broader based logic. And I have 50 years of experience teaching this to kids and, 40 years of just embarrassingly kind and sweet and effusive comments from students who say that this changed their lives or their business or their medical practice or whatever. And I would really like to see what you think about that.
Well, I look forward to that. And in terms of some of my audience, I know some of you struggle with when I get off the path of my normal Christian book interviews that I do, but just even in this invitation, I love talking to people who have different backgrounds than me, who process things through a different lens and a different worldview, because it sharpens me, it challenges me, and it puts me in that place, not unlike we talked about earlier, to live a more examined life. I don't want to just accept things for the sake of accepting things. I really want to know that I believe what I believe is what I believe. And that means examining, it means being challenged, it means talking to people who think different from you.
That's right. And Shaun, you have fun with it too, right? It's like, so many people are so serious about this stuff. Whereas I say, a lot of people have told me over the years that one of the most remarkable things about Christ when they met him in their near-death experience was the humor. And I had a personal experience with God. Okay. And it's, it just takes so much else out of the picture when you've been there. I remember I used to kind of think religious people were so inane to think that bowing down to God, that God is going to take a genuflecture from it. It's just so ridiculous. And then I had my experience of the presence of God, and I saw what that's all about. It's not like that you're trying to get on the good side of God. It's just that you can't stand up. I remember I was sitting in the chair when it came over, and you just melt. And I was going through a tough time then, and it was just, it was also humorous. God does have a sense of humor. There's no question about it. Because he put, it's like, a lot of people have a situation where they think of something like as a daydream or a fantasy. And then later on, it comes to reality, even without it. This happened to you, probably. It happens to a lot of people. It's not that you ever put any effort into it. It just emerges. And then you think, oh my God, I wish I hadn't wished for that. And that's happened so many times with me, with God. I say, and I think it's his sense of humor. Some people say they act like this is God's justice. No, it's his sense of humor. It's a great way of teaching people. And so what I finally came out with that, is I say, before I start on an endeavor, I ask God. That makes it work out a lot better.
Well, and I would totally agree that throughout the winding journey of my life, I say God has a sense of humor. He took a conservative boy who grew up Lutheran, married a Baptist girl, and then threw me headfirst into the charismatic Christian publishing world, which, the evangelical conservative world and the charismatic world couldn't be further apart. So my kind of running joke with that is, because God has a sense of humor, look at where I am today. And so, kind of a sense of humor. The fact that you and I would even, why should a guy who is an executive at a Christian publishing company talk with you about the afterlife? I mean, it's just, it's kind of fun to see where we all end up on the journey. If you've been intrigued or challenged by our conversation today, I would probably recommend starting with Raymond's memoir, Paranormal: My Life in Pursuit of the Afterlife, which was fascinating. But I love the broad scope of just, it gives us a nice overview of kind of your journey and your life. So I enjoyed that. Also definitely enjoyed Life After Life, but really any of the books that we've talked about today were fascinating in their own right. I will say that the Nonsense book challenged me, at least listening to it. So I'm excited to actually take the time to process, because it felt very different than your other books.
I think this is work to the exercises. It works. It's like you can actually expand your mind through these exercises, and suddenly the world looks very different.
Well, Dr. Moody, thank you for just a fascinating conversation. I didn't even feel like it was an interview. I feel like it was two guys just hanging out and having a great conversation.
Just hanging out. That's exactly how I'm feeling. Where do you live?
I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. So, yeah.
Yeah, I went to medical school in Augusta. And, yeah.
Well, again, folks, thanks for hanging out and being a part of our conversation. Like I said, Life After Life or Paranormal would be great books to start with, just to connect with kind of an overview of Dr. Moody's work. And as we've already agreed to on this interview, we will come back together and talk nonsense in a future episode. So, Dr. Moody, again, just a joy and a pleasure. Thank you for pouring into us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much to everybody listening. I know I'm kind of eccentric, but, my heart is in the right place.